In this series of videos, we will explore the essential components of Colorado's multi-tiered system of supports, or MTSS, which is defined as a whole school, data-driven, prevention-based framework for improving learning outcomes for every student through a layered continuum of evidence-based practices and systems. To better understand MTSS, let's look at its relationship to RTI and PBIS. Where RTI is an example of academic supports and PBIS is an example of behavioral supports, MTSS views them as using the same model for the same goal, which is a tiered approach to intervention, formally represented by a triangle, in which the green represents the universal supports that everyone would receive, the yellow represents the some, who need targeted supports, and the red that represents a few who need intensive additional intervention in academics and behavior. MTSS is better represented by this three-dimensional model, emphasizing a layered and dynamic continuum of supports, in which different levels of intervention occur simultaneously. This layered continuum of supports is comprehensive, not just intended for students only, but for all who are associated as well: teachers, parents, administrators, and members of the community. MTSS recognizes that needs may be complex, that a student or family's needs may include elements from various tiers concurrently. Needs can also shift over time. For example, a student or family experiencing a crisis may need Tier 3 support, but this may be temporary. Supports are not necessarily remedial. For example, you might review school data on a group of students in accelerated math and see that intensive supports are needed to maintain high levels of growth. In this case, supports are aimed at a group of students, not just an individual. Or, for another example, within a reading group, you might find individual students who need targeted support in reading. While universal reading supports occur in the first tier, some kids will require more targeted support, and within that group, a few will need intensive supports in reading. All levels of supports are happening concurrently. So, in the layered continuum of supports, any student or group of students could receive supports from any or all tiers at any time. MTSS is not a quick series of steps that reaches a completion, but rather involves a continual problem-solving process of defining the need, analyzing the need, implementing plans, and evaluating outcomes. In Colorado, we have taken key elements of RTI and PBIS and integrated them into MTSS, establishing 6 essential components for best practice. These key elements include shared leadership, data-based problem-solving and decision-making, layered continuum of supports, evidence-based instruction, intervention, and assessment practices, universal screening and progress monitoring, and family, school, and community partnering. When we integrate these 6 components of MTSS, we do a more thorough and effective job for the students we serve. These 6 components support the Colorado Department of Education's goal of every student, every step of the way. The other videos in this series address each of these 6 components. Now, let's continue with an overview of MTSS.
So let me start with the sort of the umbrella or the overlaying kind of framework. Multi-tier systems of support is the big idea. It's the one that describes how we organize academic and behavior supports. It came out of some earlier work called RTI, Response to Intervention. And Response to Intervention was an effort to try to coordinate evidence-based practices in a way that kids could receive the best interventions with help from teachers using data. Multi-tier systems of support came into play because it covered a bigger umbrella of all kids, all school, all staff. So RTI is under MTSS. PBIS is one element of multi-tier systems of support that organizes how we do the same thing that we do for academics, only for behavior. And we really try to create positive school climates and make sure that kids get the behavior support that they need. So one way to think about this is that multi-tiered systems of support is an umbrella. And under that, you have academic supports, you have behavior supports, and you also have other kinds of supports like health, like school-based mental health, like physical education, like nutrition, because they also fit under the umbrella of trying to support all kids. So an important part about multi-tiered systems of support is that it really hits the ground with the kids at the classroom and school level. And this thing about a continuum, about outcomes, data, practices, and systems, about using data, about paying attention to cultures, really the place where the action is at the school level. However, the success of that at the school level, the sustainability of it at the school level is linked to some other areas, which are district or in the state of Colorado at the BOSI level. And it's also driven by the policies and the behaviors, if you will, the actions and functions at the state level. So you want to think about multi-tiered systems of support. The critical features of it is being applied at multiple levels, at the classroom, individual student, classroom, school, district, as well as state. So one thing I think it's important to think about is that the academic behavior link is pretty clear for many, many students. Some of the students that our schools work with have sometimes behavior issues that pop up and are most visible, but they also oftentimes have academic challenges as well. One of the best examples I like to use is my wife's school. And in my wife's school, whenever a kid is referred for either an academic or a behavior problem, they always ask the other question. So for example, they might have a student, Michael, who's referred to SST or student support team for behavior difficulty. Before they even start talking about the behavioral interventions, the question they ask is, how well is Michael reading? How well is Michael doing in math? Because what we oftentimes find is that kids who have behavioral difficulties are very frustrated by their academic challenges, and it's manifested through their behavior. We also find the opposite. Kids are oftentimes referred to their student support team because they're having reading difficulties, and then we always ask, how is Michael doing with respect to his peers? How well is he working with respect to self-management? And we oftentimes find that behavioral difficulties are also underlying some of the academic challenges. And many of our interventions then become integrated kinds of programs. And that's a great example of multi-tiered systems of support because it brings academic and behavior together, we're layering on interventions, and we're trying to make sure that we cover the total needs of the student as opposed to just some one-dimensional feature. So another misconception is out there is that, for example, multi-tiered systems of support or PBIS is just a bunch of collection of interventions, and it's really not. MTSS and PBIS is actually about how we make sure that we organize interventions and supports into a continuum. That continuum goes from what we do for all kids up to what we do for individual students who might have more challenges. What's really important about that continuum is that it's a layered set of interventions, which means that if a kid is receiving Tier 1 or prevention-based supports, things like positive acknowledgments, active supervision, teaching of classroom routines, some kids might need more. They might need more individualized assistance, but that doesn't mean they don't get the other stuff as well. So it's layered on. So you might have a student who has some serious emotional and behavioral challenges, but they're still part of the classroom community. They still receive experiences in the classroom that all kids would receive. They just get a little extra to ensure their success behaviorally. And that's also true of the academic side. So you might have kids who have reading difficulties. They're also part of the general reading curriculum or experience, but they also get a little extra time or extra service to improve their reading success in school. One of the key fundamental features of multi-tiered systems of support is this thing we call prevention. And it's important to understand that prevention has a very comprehensive, wide kind of catchment. It's for all kids. It's for kids who have special talents. It's for kids who have risk. It's for kids with disabilities. It's for all kids. So it's acknowledging kids' strengths, making sure they get the supports to maximize those, but it's also to acknowledge that all of us have limitations and challenges that sometimes might put us into a position where we get in trouble with those. And we want to make sure kids have supports to prevent them from going to areas in which they're not able to catch themselves and get out of that kind of trajectory of getting in trouble. There's also another part of prevention, though, that's my world. There are kids who have risk. There are kids with disabilities. There are kids who have problem behaviors. And prevention actually fits them as well. Sometimes those kids who already are deep into sort of the challenge area, we don't think about that as prevention for them. They're also prevention, which means how do we prevent their risks becoming more chronic, more intense? How can we decrease the intensity? So prevention is about catching kids so they can be successful, so that we can acknowledge their success. They're overt actions that we take as staff members to make sure that the kids don't make mistakes. It's not just about smiling and catching them at the door. It's about doing some overt activities. Functionally, really what it means is that we're going to actively teach academic skills and social skills. We want to teach kids we want to teach kids the skills so they can be safe at school, so they can have respectful interactions with each other, so that staff members know how to promote responsibility at school. We know that schools, communities, neighborhoods sometimes can be challenging places to navigate or move through. I have 2 kids myself. We want to make sure the kids go to schools and be successful academically and benefit from the instruction that they receive, but we also want them to be safe. We also want them to feel like the school is a caring place for them. And we also want schools to be a place where parents and families feel comfortable going. We want schools to be a welcoming place. Positive behavioral support, response to intervention, multi-tiered system support are just fancy ways of saying how can we improve the quality of the experience that kids have at school.